I've been teaching here at the School of Theology for about 12 years, and when they hired me, they asked me to teach this Introduction to Pastoral Ministry class, the first class that students take, and the Integration Seminar, which is the last class that students take. Well, so I've taught this introductory class for quite a number of years, and I've written a book about it, because I kind of finally had to solve the problem of what is this darn thing that you have to introduce students to. Well, God decided to call me to this work right about the time when things got really confusing in Catholic ministry. So it's been quite a challenge and a big part of my journey. So I organized that class around 6 questions. Who is the minister? What do ministers do? What constitutes the practice of ministry? Why do they do it? How do they do it? When and where? So kind of the 6 questions of journalism. And I started to learn a lot of things as I taught that class from the students. One is that a lot of our students, and I should tell you a little bit about our students. We have seminarians headed toward ordination to the priesthood who are primarily Benedictines. In fact, they're just about the only seminarians we have. So they're from our own abbey or from around the world. We have quite a few that come from other places. Then we train the deacons in the St. Cloud Diocese. And then we have many lay people from all around the region and the country. And some of them are here in the room. So my classroom mirrored statistically what ministry was looking like on the national scene. You know, with about 80% lay people, about 10, 12% diaconal candidates, and about 3 to 5% priesthood candidates. So that's a pretty big challenge to think about. What do they have in common? What's distinctive about each of those roles? What are they all doing? You know, as kind of the landscape of ministry changes. So I wrote, well, one of the challenges is the term ministry is not widely used among Catholics. In fact, we never started to use the term till about Vatican II. We always thought it was too Protestant. You know, our vocabulary focused more around religious or priests. We had more of a theology of the minister, of the person, and less a theology of ministry, which is actually a verb. It's something you do. But at Vatican II, we retrieved the term, primarily because of New Testament studies. And ministry basically means service. The Greek New Testament term just means service. It's a generic term primarily in the early part of the New Testament. It doesn't change until the later part of the New Testament into a more formal term. So we didn't really use this word. Protestants did ministry, and so it wasn't really until the 1980s that we started to define it. Isn't that interesting? And that books and articles started to appear trying to say, well, what is this thing? So I leaped into that conversation, and I wanted to answer the question, really, what constitutes the doing or the practice of ministry? Another major shift had taken place also, and that was with the advent of lay ecclesial ministry around the 1980s. We couldn't ground lay ecclesial ministry in ordination because we don't ordain them. So we had to figure out a way, well, sacramentally, what does this mean? Well, theologians started to ground lay ecclesial ministry in baptism, saying baptism is the primary sacrament of lay ecclesial ministry, as well as the primary sacrament of ordination. That ordination arises out of baptism. But I started to really kind of feel like this was muddying the waters, because many people wanted to say that baptism makes us all ministers. So that's the question I'm going to ask you today. So I set out to answer that question too. Are only some people called to ministry, or are all people by virtue of their baptism called to ministry? Then I had to start to answer the question, what does the well, many students come into graduate studies. This is a big change, by the way, trying to discern if they have a call to ministry. They haven't figured it out yet. So they're taking on graduate level work to try to discern whether this is what God calls them to. And it can be quite confusing because ministry looks like a lot of other things. It can kind of look like social work. It looks like teaching, because people do teach in ministry, you know. It looks like a lot of social service agencies do advocacy and social justice work, right? So distinguishing what really is ministry and what is not is a challenge for students. And then students often come into ministry studies through one door. So they mistake one part of ministry for the whole thing. So for example, well, around here, they come in through the liturgy door oftentimes. So they've been a liturgist, in a parish for a while, and they think that liturgy just constitutes the whole of ministry, and they don't know anything about pastoral care. They don't know anything about social justice ministry. Or they've been in youth ministry, and they think that that's everything about ministry. Or they come in through the faith formation door, and they think, well, the liturgist just does that over there. And so I had to find a way of really explaining and talking about the purpose and the practices of ministry in a broad enough way that accounted for the breadth of it, as well as for why we have such specialized role in the community today. Because we do know some people are really good at pastoral care work, but you wouldn't maybe want them to preach. Or some people are really good at preaching, but they don't necessarily have the gifts for administering the community. So that was another question I really had to account for, both the breadth of ministry as well as specialization. Finally, I had to think about our terms. I had kind of felt that the language of, well, you know what, I'm going to come back to this. I'm going to come back to this point. So in today's presentation, I want to answer the two of my questions. What is ministry and why do we do it? Okay, what is it and why do we do it? So I'd like you to take a few minutes to answer that first question. Whoops. I got a very, okay.
Got a mind of its own.
Technology, huh? What's the purpose of ministry and why does it exist in the Christian community? What is the purpose of it and why do you think it exists? So let's just take about 5 minutes in your whatever table you're sitting at, or maybe you two want to find a partner there too, and introduce yourself if you haven't introduced yourself to the people at the table, and then we'll come back and hear some answers and I'll give you my answer as well, okay? So why do we do it? Why do we do it? Why does it exist? Ready to come back together and share some of your thoughts? I hate to interrupt you. Okay, what's the purpose of ministry? Why do we have it? Why does it exist in the Christian community? It always has in every Christian community on the face of the earth. It's very interesting. Why? What did you say? Why does it? What's the purpose? Okay. Service. Okay, so what we said before, this basic understanding of to serve. Okay. Well, that's what it is, but why? Why service? Mm-hmm.
Because we're motivated by a spiritual call, a spiritual desire. It's more than money, it's more than prestige, it's...
Really?
Come on.
Now they tell you.
Now they tell me.
It's a call that
It's
comes from within, and
okay,
somehow you got to answer that.
Okay.
It doesn't hold weight.
Okay. Okay. So it's a very personal call. Mm-hmm. Why? Why does it exist? What's its purpose?
It exists because I'm loved.
Because you're loved.
And
It exists because of God's love.
yes, because
Okay.
we're loved, we're compelled and required to bring that love into the world.
Okay.
And from the Christian view,
That's it. God loves the world.
Mm-hmm.
from the Christian view, we're building up the kingdom, we're building the whole body, we're needed.
Number one answer. We're building up the kingdom, she said. were needed. What else did you say? That's about it. That's about it. No, that's okay. Building up the kingdom is usually the number one answer. Mm-hmm. Trish.
At this table, we think that we're wired that way, that it's in our DNA. It's not just a spiritual choice.
Uh-huh. We're created.
Correct.
It comes from creation.
We live together, and in order for the survival of the team, of the pack, when we see someone fall, we have an instinct
To serve. Okay. Okay. Mm-hmm.
I'm a little bit uncomfortable just talking about Christian ministry.
Okay.
Because the atheist is called to ministry also.
Okay. Very common answer as well. Uh-huh.
And I sort of agree. I think we're called to ministry by virtue of our humanity
Okay.
and the fact that we have the divine.
So it's common. It's something that belongs to all of us. Okay. Okay. The reason I said, did anybody else have one? The reason I said that your answer was the number one answer is because it's the most common answer since about the 1980s. When, again, because of New Testament studies, this idea of God's kingdom and God's reigning presence and God's, people started to see that this was the central aspect of Jesus' teaching. And really, if you want to understand who and what Jesus is and the way of Jesus, you have to understand what his teaching is about this kingdom of God. But if you don't mind, I'm going to disagree with you. Are you disagreeing? How come?
I think it's more than that,
Okay.
that, how can I say it? If building the kingdom of God is the goal, it's different than a process of attraction that draws.
Okay, it's a good distinction.
I'm having trouble elucidating
Yeah.
what you're
Yeah.
saying.
Yeah, it's different. If the building of it is the goal, that's different than the process, right? Okay, well, the thing I'm disagreeing about is the verb, build. I really don't think that ministry exists in the church to build God's kingdom, because God's reigning presence, God's grace, the little bit of yeast, all those teachings of Jesus, you don't bring God's kingdom about. There's nothing that you can do. If a minister goes to work every day and thinks, well, today I've just got to work harder so that, God's kingdom will finally come about, we've kind of distorted what our task is from what God's task is. God's reign, God's kingdom is a total and complete gift. It's total and complete gift. You don't have to do anything to make it come about. God gives it to us. So then the verb build, so I don't like that one song either, right? I go like this. I just go like this.
One song you don't like?
Yeah, exactly. No, that just one song about the kingdom when they say, build the kingdom of justice. I just think, no, that's the wrong verb. Jesus points to the kingdom. Jesus shows people the kingdom. Jesus invites you into God's reigning presence. It's not your job to bring it about. And I've got to tell students this over and over again. You're going to have a Messiah complex. You're going to be burned out in about how long? If you think every day you go to work, you've got to bring about God's kingdom. It's an idea that comes from the late 19th and early 20th century, too, about a very progressive idea of history. If we just work harder, we can make our historical conditions better. But it's not what Jesus means by the kingdom. And I don't think it's the purpose of ministry.
All of a sudden, because I'm a musician, I'm thinking of all the songs of
I'm sorry. I'm so sorry.
No, but
I think they're theologically wrong. I really
maybe
do.
in a different way. There's a beautiful song that we do, build a table that
Exactly.
for everyone. So the things, the physical things, build a space where we can gather.
Exactly.
Build
Exactly.
a table where
Right.
we can gather.
God's reigning presence is there. You don't have to make God be present.
It's
Yeah.
a different building, the
Exactly.
abstract.
Exactly. Yeah. Do you see the distinction? Yeah, of course we build a society with greater justice, right? With greater love, with greater compassion. But God will bring about the kingdom. Don't worry about that. Gail?
I think the tents back then, they pulled the tent pegs out and expanded the tent so there's more room under it.
Yeah. Yeah.
for people, that it's the just expanding the current structures that we have.
Uh-huh.
So it's like rebuilding.
Rebuilding, there you go. Okay, okay. Okay, so my answer, yes, Ed?
I have a problem with the word kingdom.
Yes, that's the problem too, we know. Yeah, we think it's, we hear it as a place, like if we make society better, that will actually be God's kingdom. And most New Testament people will say, think of it again, not as a noun, but as a verb. It's God's reigning presence. It's God's total and complete presence, which, according to Jesus' parables and the healing stories, is breaking in now on this beautiful, beautiful spring morning, right? And it's already and not yet. The fullness of God's reigning presence will come about in the eschaton. So we see and experience it in glimpses, and we'll experience its fullness. Molly?
So if we think of the reign of God being God's compassion, justice, mercy,
Exactly.
all of that.
Yeah.
So in the day-to-day, what I'm doing in ministry, though, is working to create spaces, practices, experiences of that in a deeper, more whole way.
Yeah, but you don't have to make it come about.
Oh, no.
It is.
But I can
You
create-
point to it, you
Yeah.
nurture it, you open
Right.
people's hearts to it, you point the way.
Yeah.
Exactly. You invite
And if
people
we're
into
wrong,
that.
We can tell them that too.
Exactly, right, okay. So my answer to the question of what is the purpose of ministry and why it exists is discipleship. So I did an extensive study of the New Testament, and I think that discipleship and not ministry is the primary reality of the Christian life. It exists prior to ministry. It's baptism. It's baptismal. Baptism makes us disciples, and ministry develops and exists in the church for the sake of discipleship. The term disciple is used 260 times in the New Testament, primarily in the Gospels and the book of Acts. It was a common term. It does not appear in the Old Testament, interestingly enough, maybe once or twice. It's not a Hebraic term. It comes to us more from the Greek-speaking world. And disciples were, what does it mean? Do you know what the term follower? It just means a follower of a teacher. So these people lived in an oral culture, and they followed teachers. Now just think about our current political situation, Somebody gets up and speaks, right? And they try to persuade rhetorically their point of view, and then they get you to follow them. So Plato, Aristotle, every great Greek rhetorician had followers or disciples. And in Jesus' time, there were many other teachers. John the Baptist obviously is one. He has 2 disciples standing with him, people who have followed his teaching. And he relinquishes them to follow Christ. He says, you go follow. So this was a common form of discourse, dialogue, persuasion at the time of Jesus. It's one of the primary ways that Christians are named in the New Testament. They are disciples of Christ. The other, of course, the earliest one is called the Way, and then the third one is called Christians. So one of my tasks was, I really felt that the language of the clergy and laity in our contemporary context, particularly in our theological discourse, had just about run its course, and that it didn't make a lot of sense anymore. For a variety of reasons. The term clergy comes from about the 3rd or 4th century. You cannot find it in the New Testament. So it's not really a way that even ministers are named in the New Testament. Just comes from the word kleros, which means lot. I mean, it's not even that strong of a term. And the same thing about laity. I've never liked the term laity, to be perfectly honest. Jesus never says, come be the laity, He never says, come be a layperson. He doesn't. He says, come be a disciple. So I wanted to retrieve this new biblical understanding of discipleship and ministry as kind of the core foundational theological categories, out of which then we can make further and other distinctions. But somehow clergy and laity just weren't matching the reality even of my classroom. Do you see the problem? And I thought they were kind of stale. Plus, we were trying to build a theology of lay ecclesial ministry off of our theology of the laity, which has the laity in the world and clergy in the church, and it just was not making sense. We had kind of run those concepts about as far as we could get them. So part of my theological task here is to try to reframe or find some other vocabulary that might enliven and deepen and enrich our understanding of both the baptismal call of discipleship as well as the call to ministry. So let me tell you a little bit about how I frame discipleship, but let's see if this thing works. Well, let me tell you a little bit about Jesus' understanding of discipleship that's different from other teachers during his time. People, just like in our political situation, they could follow one teacher, then they'd hear somebody else speak, and they'd follow that person, right? So you could follow, follow Romney for a while, and then Rick Santorum, and then you could follow, right? And that's what the primaries are about, right? Well, when Jesus called people to be his disciple, he meant it to be lifelong. Lifelong. You were to give your whole life. His call is life, and you do not choose him, he chooses you. He says, you come and follow me. Remember the early stories of the call in each disciples? You come and follow, and I'll give you a new name. That beautiful line at the end of this reading today, you were to be called Cephas. So there's a radical conversion in Jesus' understanding of discipleship. That it's your whole life, your whole self, that this new name reflects this new state of being. He's going to get into a lot of trouble because this call of discipleship is pretty inclusive. He does not leave anybody out about who can be called. So whether you're a sinner, an outcast, you're unclean, he meant everybody. Another really interesting thing about the New Testament is the word disciple is almost never singular. It's almost always plural. Isn't that interesting? So disciples. So you're called into this communal reality. It's never just an individual thing. The minute you're called, you're a member of this, what Paul says is the body of Christ. And baptism, of course, initiates us into the discipleship of the community. And of course, as we saw in the illumination, this path of discipleship leads us to live out a sacrificial love, to give our whole life long. So his idea of discipleship was pretty different from other teachers at his time. It wasn't just agreeing with his ideas. Do you see? It was about immersing yourself in this whole way of life. Well, as I studied the New Testament, I found 7 features of discipleship. And there are probably more, but this is all I could write, okay? So let's talk about each one of these, and then we'll take a little break. Okay, so we've already looked at being a follower, being a worshiper, being a witness, a forgiver, a neighbor, a prophet, and a steward. So for me, these are the 7 features of discipleship that Jesus both portrays and lives out. Jesus is the perfect embodiment of each of these. That's my Christological claim. And Jesus invites you into each of these. So I've always, since as a young child, had a very strong imitatio Christi understanding that the Christian life is an imitation of Christ, is following and you're meant to live out the life that he lived out. Okay, so we've talked about follower, and of course we're in this great season of mystagogy, and I think that being a follower basically entails living within these deep mysteries of our faith, that it's not a problem to be solved. It's not, once you get all the answers, you'll have it figured out, right? It's deeply being immersed. And it's really embracing Christ as your teacher, to embrace Christ as your teacher. And in the Psalms, the psalmist will say, teach me to know your ways, O God, and lead me in your truth. Teach me, for all your paths are steadfast love and faithfulness. So this idea even from the Old Testament that God is the teacher and that there's a path or a way for you to learn. But you've got to follow it. You've got to get on that path to start to figure out what it is. But I love that idea of God as the teacher and then Christ as our teacher. Each of the Gospels portrays discipleship differently. This is a really interesting study if you want to take some time to look at it. In Mark's Gospel, of course, the first Gospel, boy, the disciples, not a pretty picture, right? They're not portrayed well. Some people think that Mark's Gospel, that Peter might be an source for Mark's Gospel because the portrayal of Peter is so bad. So in Mark's Gospel, it's divided in half. Chapter 8's the dividing line. The first half of the Gospel, Jesus has this very busy ministry in Galilee where he spends half of his time teaching in parables and the other half healing the sick and exorcising demons. And then we have in chapter 8 where he reveals himself as the Son of Man who has to be persecuted and die. And then the second half of the Gospel is the journey to Jerusalem. So 2 sets of travel or journey scenes in Mark's Gospel. It's really interesting. In the first half, the disciples, they just follow along eagerly, taking it all in. But in chapter 8, they totally and completely misunderstand. The deaf man cannot hear, but recognizes Jesus as the Messiah. The disciples who do hear are actually quite deaf. The blind man who sees Jesus and recognizes him, the disciples are totally blind to who he is, completely blind. They want to be first, they get in the boat, and Mark says they have a hardened heart. Remember from the Old Testament? Their hearts are hardened. That's how low they've gotten on the path of discipleship. Then when they turn and make the journey to Jerusalem, of course, they totally abandon Jesus by the time he gets to the cross. In Mark's Gospel, Jesus is totally alone. Totally alone. And in the resurrection scene, when the resurrection of Christ is announced, they run away afraid. So it's a bleak, it's really a dark picture. If you're not having a good day, don't read Mark. Read Luke. It's tough. But it's a very real picture for the early Christian community about what you captured in the image, how difficult this path is. If you are going to follow all the way to the cross, you've got to make choices along each of the way. It's a very tough gospel. Matthew, who picks up Mark, of course, in large quantity, has a very different understanding of discipleship. He thinks that following Jesus, the struggle of discipleship, is not the hardened heart, but little faith. He calls it little faith. And he thinks that people totally misunderstand that faith is getting the concepts right and forsaking the practice. So we get this great Sermon on the Mount, and then, of course, Matthew 25. You know, hey, listen, if you haven't given me food, right? If you haven't given me a drink when I'm thirsty, visited me in prison, forget it. You know, you've missed it. You've missed it. You've got to embody and practice this faith. So for Matthew, little faith. Luke, discipleship is about joy, joy, joy. Very little suffering, as in Mark. That's why he's saying, if you're having a bad day, read Luke. You know, in Luke's gospel, the disciples are filled with compassion. They share in the joy of Christ's coming. The gospel begins with Zechariah in the temple praying, and it ends with the disciples in the temple praying as well. So there's this effusive sense of the Spirit at work in the disciples. You know, they follow Jesus to the cross. And in John's gospel, of course, disciples are called friends. Friends. It's our strongest notion of friendship in the New Testament. Yeah, this community of friends, which is embodied by the washing of the feet, right? So really beautiful understanding of discipleship. So some different portraits. So just as each gospel writer has to explain to their community who Jesus is, there's an accompanying argument going on about what is discipleship? What does it really mean to embrace this path? And you can see 4 different ones there. And then Paul as well. If we had time, we could talk about that. So follower. Jesus is the perfect follower of God's ways. He embodies the perfect, total fulfillment of faith, belief, practice, right? Friendship. And he invites us to follow that way. Now, people in the New Testament who are curious about Jesus and want to follow and approach him become a worshiper. And oftentimes they use the language of worship when they see or approach Jesus by calling him, Lord, Lord, Lord. So, for example, in Matthew's gospel, the centurion who comes to Jesus to have his servant healed, it's the same Greek phrase. He pays Jesus homage. It's the same phrase as the 3 magi in the infancy narrative. So it's an indication of how deeply in one's heart one recognizes who the Lord is. Who the Lord is, and falls at his feet in adoration. So the basis of being a worshiper, of being called to be a worshiper, is adoration. That's where the term comes from. I'm not talking about just going to church on Sunday here, okay? I'm talking about having the disposition in your heart for worshiping, for recognizing who God is, what God has done, and adoring God, loving God, recognizing. That's the disposition of the worshiper. Of course, Jesus is the perfect worshiper in the New Testament, particularly in Luke's gospel. Jesus just praying all the time. He embodies this life of prayer. In the temptation, he leaves his ministry often to go and pray. In the garden, on the cross, in the Emmaus story, right? So there's this really beautiful, and as I said, the gospel begins in prayer and ends in prayer. People in the temple praying at both ends of the story. So the whole frame is that Jesus is a man of prayer, and he teaches his disciples to pray, and that by his whole sacrificial act, he embodies giving his whole self. That's the disposition of the worshiper. That leads you to go to church on Sunday, to pray every morning, to have a heart that's filled with wonder at God's goodness in your life, that as a heart that pleads with God, that laments to God when you suffer greatly. That's what it means to be a worshiper. People who tend to worship Jesus,
Is worship
Michael?
an external thing or an internal thing?
Well, it's an internal disposition, right, that leads to external acts. Right? So I don't just worship by myself alone in my heart if I'm a disciple. I feel and understand and long for God's holy presence in my life, and we gather around the table to celebrate that, right? So all of our acts of worship, look at the monks, 7 times a day, plus Eucharist, right? These are all acts of worship. Now, we all know, come on, admit it, you can do all the external things you want without the internal disposition. Right? Churches are filled with people who, yeah? You want both, okay? It's not a trade-off between the two. We want worshiping communities who are filled, right, in our hearts with the love for God. So it's not an either-or. And really good worship, right, leads us to a deeper relationship, I think, to God. Mm-hmm.
Also, worshiping, adoring the Lord is different than worshiping and loving a father.
Worshiping a Lord is different than loving and divinity Father.
Jesus called God Father.
Yeah, Abba. Yep. Right. Very intimate, right, understanding of. Yep. It's a love relationship. Yep. Adoration, the term adoration connotes a very strong also distinction between you and God, though. You worship because God is greater, more glorious, right? Distinctive from you. You are not God. Maybe you didn't know that, but aren't you glad you came this morning to find that out? Yeah, now I tell you, yeah. So it does have this sense of paying homage to that which is greater than you. That's the disposition. Okay, those who worship become witnesses. Now, I love this category. I love this one. What's a witness? Very good. Greek understanding of the word martyr, to give a witness with your whole life. Okay, that's not where the term witness begins, though. It's where it ends in the New Testament. But do you know what the term witness means? It's to give a testimony. It's an oral act. It's a speech act. So it's about speaking. So don't tell me about St. Francis, okay? Students always want to tell me about St. Francis. Preach often, and when necessary, use words. Okay, all right, that's really nice. But you know what? You also have to use words and use them well. So in the Old Testament, to give a witness comes, of course, from the court of law. And it meant to be an eyewitness, that you gave a testimony about the truth that you have seen. Okay, just think about that for a minute. To be an eyewitness in the court meant you told the truth about what you've seen. So let's say Maureen steals Ed's cow. According to Jewish law, I know, she's bad, Ed, you gotta watch her. She in their law system, you had to have 2 eyewitnesses, right, to condemn her. So that an eyewitness, they had to actually visually see her do this offense. And then there are many stories, right, in the Old Testament of false witnesses or people who lie in court. So that's where the idea of witness comes from, to tell the truth about what you have seen. And then the other teaching in the Old Testament is about bearing false witness. Well, the idea of being a witness just explodes in the New Testament. It just really widens out. It still carries that same basic notion of telling the truth about what you have seen. Okay, so Luke begins his gospel saying that, dear Theophilus, I am giving you this account, from eyewitnesses. That gave validity to this story about Jesus. So Luke was not an eyewitness to the story that he was telling, but he got the story from eyewitnesses. So that kind of verified the truthfulness of it. Of course, Jesus is the true witness to God's presence, God's kingdom, God's reign. Jesus is the true image of the truth, the way, the truth, and the life. Jesus is a witness at his own trial. Do you remember they try to look for some false witnesses to witness against him? But he is the true witness. And John says that Jesus came as a witness to testify to the light. So Jesus comes as a testimony. He's a faithful witness. Paul says that through baptism, we bear witness as children of God, as heirs in Christ. And of course, in the book of Hebrews, we are part of the community of witnesses, which is really a beautiful line. And then, of course, as Maureen noted, early Christians took on this idea that to bear witness to Christ with one's whole life and death was to be a martyr. So the Greek word martyr means witness, to be a witness. Ignatius of Antioch was being led off to be martyred, and he said that now I am learning what it means to be a disciple. So, Trish.
So with this definition, an illiterate youth person would never be able to be a disciple because they couldn't witness with words.
In their culture? I hope in our culture they still could, because they still have language or speech. Right?
What I'm getting at is the word part of it.
Yeah.
Because I'm wondering, we have sacraments that take place
Yeah, we use it. Yeah, we use it more broadly. Yeah, but primarily it's derivation, and even for us in a court of law, to be a witness is to give a test. The broader term, I think what you're getting at, is to give a testimony about what is true. In their culture, it's primarily a speech act. Okay, I think in our culture it primarily is too, but it can be rendered. You can give a testimony to the truth in other ways. Right? What? Yeah, or you could write it down. I mean, there's other ways to testify. Okay. But that's the point. I'm testifying. So, as an act of discipleship, to give a witness means that I tell you about what God has done in my life. That I tell you what Jesus means. That God called me, that God healed me, that God forgave me, that in all the struggles of my life, God's never abandoned me. I tell you the story of my life and the story of God in my life. That's what it means to give a witness. Now, Catholics, this is not a big one. This is not, in some Protestant communities, this is a liturgical act. This constitutes the center sometimes of liturgy, particularly in evangelical communities. But we don't have a space liturgically for giving a witness. How many of you have witnessed a witness? Yeah, it's fantastic. I mean, if they're really good, right, yeah. I mean, one reason AA is so popular, not popular, I didn't mean it like that, effective, that's what I meant. One reason AA is so effective and everything that's come off of AA is because the primary practice is to give a witness about your life. You know, you screwed up and you changed and you're on a different path. So we don't have that liturgically, which is a little unfortunate. But I do think it's one of the reasons why small groups and small group ministry can be so powerful in Catholic parishes, because it's primarily the ministry of giving a witness. It's a very important practice. My dad did not grow up with this as a Catholic Christian. Not with the vocabulary, the practice, just no way. Goes to church every Sunday as the external practice, but not with the vocabulary of telling you, I got to tell you about what God has done for me. Yeah.
I was really happy you used the word story. I just heard last Sunday from the man who said that facts define us, but only story redeems us. And I think that's the witness, the story.
Yeah. So yeah, witness comes in the form of story. It's storytelling. Yeah. So Jesus, as the perfect witness, tells the truth about who God is, and then we follow in that way. Okay, so oftentimes what people give a witness about is forgiveness, right? So disciples learn to be a forgiver. Okay, this is the one I can't stand. I like witness, but forgiveness, Mike?
Are you a martyr?
No.
Pardon?
No.
You aren't a martyr?
How could I be? I'm alive.
You're martyred.
I'm a witness, but I'm not a martyr. Martyrs literally die.
Why do martyrs have to die?
It's just the meaning of the term. It's
But I thought you said martyr meant witness.
in the Greek, the term comes from the word witness. It means a witness who's given their whole life and death. No, we don't just say that any of us are martyrs. Oh, we might use it metaphorically, but that's not literally what the term means.
I think it's a bad word to use, but isn't our call to give our whole life?
Yes, so I don't think we seek martyrdom. In fact, this kind of early Christians had to start to send a warning sign out to the community. You don't seek to be a martyr. If you're faced with giving your whole life, you want to have the faith and courage to be able to do it. But you don't seek martyrdom.
Didn't the Archbishop of New York, when he put on his red garb and gave a speech over in the Vatican, didn't he associate that with martyrdom?
I have no idea.
I
have no idea.
I'm wrong on that, but I thought I heard something.
Oh, I have no idea.
I think that has to do again with the idea of martyr being a witness with your life, not necessarily the dying part. You know, we talk about that, like Martin Luther King was a witness or a martyr for what he believed in long before he was shot. And so I think that's what we talk about, being
The
a martyr,
broader,
witness,
the broader sense of it. But we should really be careful about claiming ourselves as a martyr. Let history say that about you, or the community say that about you. You just live your life, the path that you go down. Okay.
I don't like the word.
You don't like the word martyr.
No.
Yeah, it can probably be
I don't,
misused.
And I was a little surprised when he, if I read correctly, I was a little surprised when he used it.
Well, send him a note. Let's say. Okay. I was moving on to forgiveness. Oh.
Do I need it?
Now you do.
He might, no. Okay, I think that the call to discipleship entails being a forgiver. Sorry. This is the good news. This is a hard one. What? This is really hard. To me, this is the hardest of these 7 features of discipleship. But if you read the New Testament, it is one of the central teachings. Because it's such an intricate part of our lives. It entails all of our relationships. Forgiveness is really hard work. Of course, Jesus is the perfect forgiver, right? Jesus is the perfect forgiver. Yahweh in the Old Testament forgives, and Jesus teaches that we have to forgive 70 times 7. So this idea that forgiveness is a practice, that Jesus deeply connects, that if you do not forgive, God does not forgive you. It's a pretty stark teaching. Jesus says, for if you forgive others their trespasses, God will also forgive you. But if you do not forgive others, neither will God forgive your trespasses. That is some pretty tough going. So, and in Luke's gospel, Jesus says, do not be judged and you will not be judged. Do not condemn and you will not be condemned. Forgive and you will be forgiven. So, and of course, in Luke's gospel, Jesus embodies perfect forgiveness hanging on the cross. Okay, I can hardly do it on my best days, but here he is suffering. And if you recall that scene, he is the innocent one being hung alongside of 2 guilty prisoners. So they're guilty of what they have done, and he is innocent. And the one man says to him, hey, buddy, if you're the man, get us down from here. Save us. And the other guy says, yeah, don't you? We're guilty. We're rightly being condemned for what we have done. And then he says, Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom. And Jesus says, forgives him his wrongdoing. And you will be with me today in paradise. And of course, Jesus asks God to forgive those who are murdering him. Okay, so, my mother-in-law calls and I, have to beg for forgiveness. So, this is not an easy path. So, a little teaching on forgiveness, because being a forgiver, the practice of forgiveness, is getting huge attention these days. Did you know this? There are institutes for forgiveness, studies at Stanford University and the University of Wisconsin in Madison, and researchers around the world have all gotten into forgiveness because of social political situations like the Truth and Reconciliation Commission in South Africa and what else? And the Bosnian War, the war there. And of course, just these tremendous atrocities, the Protestant and Catholic Irish conflict. So people have really gotten interested in the personal, social, and political dynamics of forgiveness. But here's the thing, Christians have known about forgiveness for a long time. And we've got something to say about this. But anyway, everybody else is paying attention to it now. But actually the dynamics of being a forgiver, so forgiving somebody when they have harmed you, and of accepting forgiveness from somebody when they've harmed you, Did I say that right? When you're the offender and when you've been offended, the dynamics are pretty much the same. So just a really quick lesson. This is from the University of Stanford. Robert Enright's work on forgiveness, 4-stage process of forgiveness. The first is emotional. You have to uncover the emotions. If you've been injured, if you've been injured by someone, hurt by someone, you have got to recognize and feel the emotion of the injury. I'm sorry, I hate to tell you this, but you can't skip this one. You can't move to forgiveness without admitting to yourself, I feel really hurt. I feel really wounded by this person or this event or this situation. If you have harmed someone, your first step is to become aware that you are a harmer, that you have offended someone, that you have hurt someone. So just uncovering the just raw emotion in either place, that's the first step. The second is more cognitive. You have to make a decision. If you've been injured by someone, you have to think your way through that you could forgive them, that you could have a change of heart and not stand in the injury anymore, but decide to forgive. If you've harmed someone, you have to make a decision to seek forgiveness. You have to decide, I'm going to try to seek forgiveness. It's a more cognitive decision. You have to make a decision about something. The third one is you have to work at it. If you have been harmed by someone, you have to accept and bear the pain of the injury, as well as reframe your perspective on the person. This is the hardest part. You have to see them as a whole person, a child of God. The person is not the harm that they did. Everybody who writes about forgiveness says that forgiving is not forgetting. That's not what this is. It's reframing your perspective. If you have harmed someone, you have got to understand the pain and hurt from their perspective. It's called empathy. Empathy is one of the hardest human emotions or dispositions to have. You have to understand the pain and hurt from that person's perspective. And the majority of harm that's done is often unforgiven in their research because a person does not show remorse for the hurt that they caused. Just think about this a little bit more. Yeah. Most of the pain and hurt that we cause each other is unforgiven if we do not feel that the other person is really sorry for what they've done and that they empathize with our pain. So if you've been harmed by someone or wounded by someone who cannot feel what you have gone through on some level, it's very hard, research shows, to forgive them. It's not impossible. But as the forgiver, you have got to accept that that is a possibility for them, that they cannot feel that. You see? Yeah, it's a tough one. It's a tough one. Just that's the problem in the sexual abuse thing. That's what I was trying to get you to see. If an abuser, in that situation, if an abuser does not express any both remorse and understanding of what you've experienced, it's very hard to forgive. It's not impossible, because for us, forgiveness comes from God's grace as well. It's not just all of our work. Okay? Then the fourth part of forgiveness is, a deepening phase. If you've been deeply wounded and you can feel that pain, you can come to the decision that you want to forgive, you can come to a new understanding of the person that's harmed you, you can then carry that deeper into your life. You've reframed, rethought, reintegrated. You can find maybe a new meaning or new awareness, which decreases the negative feelings of the harm. because most harm and pain, right, comes with a ton of anger, right? Outrage, revenge. You just name every, every bad or negative feeling. If you are the offender and you've been able to feel deeply what you have done, come to a decision to seek forgiveness and empathize with the person, you too can come to a deeper awareness and understanding of yourself, the situation, and the negative feelings of having offended someone can be lessened. Most research shows that people who forgive others and those who seek forgiveness are healthier. They have better health. That lack of forgiveness in people's lives leads to heart disease, all these really chronic ailments. And that most people seek to forgive others because they cannot tolerate the negative emotional drain on themselves. Isn't that interesting? They will finally forgive because they can't put up with the toll it takes on us. Oh, isn't that forgiveness hard? It's really hard. It is not reconciliation, right? It is not reconciliation. Reconciliation is when those four pieces are mutual and you do them together. But many of us have to forgive someone who can't do the other side of the work, right? They might be dead, they might be mentally ill, they might just be so stuck in their ways they're never ever going to change themselves. You might have to do all the work of forgiving on your side without reconciliation. Same true if you're an offender. Maybe you've just really, done something bad to somebody and they're dead or they're, not in relationship anymore or not going to forgive you. You can still come to forgiveness without reconciliation. But what forgiveness studies around the country miss is in our faith, God is the connective tissue of all this work, right? We couldn't bear these wounds and forgive each other without God's fundamental love and presence in our life. I couldn't do it, honestly, no way. And I couldn't seek forgiveness when I harm someone without really God's loving presence saying, accompany me in that journey. So being a forgiver, it's I think it's the hardest one for me, okay? So I'm not going to give a witness about that either. Okay. Okay, any questions about forgiveness, to be a forgiver?
I'd like to make a comment. If I say something, I say, I don't like your dress. Your dress is horrible. Now, you have a choice of saying, I'm evil, I have been offended by you, or I'm not offended by you. Or you say, thank you for pointing this particular thing out. And this is what happens too many times.
My husband
when I give
thought I
$100
looked great this morning, by the way.
Pardon?
My husband said, you look great this morning.
You do look.
Well, you do. Your smile and all the rest. But my point is this. If I give $100 to a charity, you say, isn't that wonderful? If somebody steals $100 from me, that no good tramp that took it from me. Both times you lost $100. One time this person took it and you decided that it wasn't that way. So now when we talk about forgiveness, and forgiving for a corrective, what I would call a corrective criticism, and you hold it as a judgment. So the
right.
forgiveness is an entirely different concept of, I didn't even know I offended the person. I thought I did something nice for him. And all of a sudden, here's a grudge that comes
Yes.
up.
Well,
And
that example might be on the level of manners. So you had no intention to hurt my feelings. You thought, well, I'm telling her the truth. I'm giving her a witness about that dress.
Of course, that's just his opinion.
That's just his opinion, right? And of course, it matters the way that you give
Yes.
criticism. I mean, I'm a teacher. I've got to criticize students' work all the
Yes,
time, but I've got to do it in a way that they can hear me. Now, taking offense at that is something different. And that's why the forgiveness work is so hard, because it's interpersonal. You have to find out whether the person really has intended to harm you in some way.
Yeah.
And even as the harmer, it might not make any difference sometimes. If a person feels harmed or offended, you have to listen to that.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, I think
It's
that's
hard.
what
It's
is
very
really
knotty.
difficult about it, is if you're the forgiver, you cannot, it is really for you, and you can't put any judgment on how the other person is going to respond. Because if you do, then it's not, do you know what I mean?
Yep.
It really
It's your-
is your work.
Yep, yep.
And
You can
can't
only
have
tell the
any
truth about it.
expectation.
You can only tell the truth about what you feel or have known in this, right?
Because too often,
But
I mean,
for-
you see it, especially with, well, I'm gonna say kids, but grown-ups too.
Yeah.
I forgave you. What? You don't accept it? Okay,
You-
I forgave you. Why didn't you and all of a sudden you're judging their motivation, but it's for you.
Yeah, that's
And
right.
that can change
That's
you.
right. On both sides, you can judge motivation, but
Yeah.
that's not your task,
Yeah.
right? Right. I mean, forgiveness really does require humility. It requires an acceptance of. No, go ahead. What were you going to say?
I do really appreciate, and I guess, and it does take work and practice,
Oh.
because, a friend said, okay, I take offense to that, and I said, I am so glad you said that.
I didn't know
because
that.
That is not what I meant.
Exactly,
And
right.
it was so nice to be able to explain,
Yeah.
she's like, okay, I get it.
So sometimes it is about clear communication.
Yeah.
Right, right.
I think witnessing and forgiving can be like united into a single act. I'm thinking of Pope John Paul's forgiveness of the guy who
Exactly,
shot him.
exactly.
And it was such a public
Witness.
witness.
Yeah, exactly.
And to liberate the
Right.
man in prison from his own feelings,
Right.
so he could feel anymore.
Right. And a lot of witness stories are about the brokenness in our lives for which we sought God's forgiveness or another person's forgiveness, right? So, okay, let's do, you need a break here. Neighbor, real quickly. Neighbor in the Old Testament is literally someone who lived alongside of you, someone who lives alongside. So it's about physical proximity. And in the Old Testament, that could be kin, cousins, extended family, other neighbors, and of course, the Jewish law is filled with neighbor laws. How do we get along? How does Marie not steal the cow? Or lust after Ed, I know, she's struggling on this path. So they had to determine a lot of what it meant to live alongside of each other. And of course, the great neighbor love, our neighbor love commandment comes from that tradition, to love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your mind, with all your soul, and to love your neighbor as yourself. But Jesus comes along and he just kind of blows that neighbor thing right out of the water. Like the person next door, your mother, your father, come on. That's easy. You know who you have to love? You know who's your neighbor? Those dirty outcast people you don't, want to associate with, you won't eat at the same table with. Neighbors are your enemies. Neighbors are your enemies, Jesus says in the Sermon on the Mount. Neighbors are people you don't like, you don't get along with, you have the opposite point of view of. Yeah, Jesus changed the whole thing about who is our neighbor. Of course, Jesus is the perfect neighbor. Jesus embodies the perfect neighbor love, particularly by his practice of table fellowship. Jesus will eat food with anyone. And this gets him in big trouble. This is one of the things where there's Pharisees at the door or Sadducees saying, who's he eating with? When he's anointed by the woman in Mark's gospel, or in Matthew's gospel, he is in the house of a leper. That's where the story begins. Jesus is in the house of a leper, totally unclean, being anointed by a woman. Bad, bad, bad. So Jesus breaks just about every boundary of neighbor relations, and he opens a path for us to say, this is the love that you have to have for one another. He never met my mother-in-law, though, so he doesn't know what that might be. Oh, that's true. Thanks, Ed. Thanks, Ed. Thanks, Ed. Thanks, Ed. You're right. She would criticize the dress, just so you know. Yeah.
When we're talking about that discipleship, that borders cosmic theology, I'm thinking, John, when you touch one thing, you're connected to all things. So when you touch an enemy,
And the way you touch them,
Exactly.
that's what you're saying,
Your touch
is the,
much more
yeah,
beyond that
Yeah.
entity.
yeah, yeah. So discipleship also means being a prophet. And just real quickly, what I mean by being a prophet is a prophet is someone who stands in the neighborhood and sees that neighbor relations are going bad, right? Prophets are people that understand that we're harming our own neighbors. We're harming each other, whether people don't have enough food or enough housing, or they exist in unjust social or political or economic circumstances. Prophets are people who see what's going wrong in the neighborhood and beyond that neighborhood as well, and can speak out against it and work on behalf of it. And here neighbor love reaches beyond people, we don't know, that we're really called to advocate, protect, help, enrich the lives of.
I think any time you're speaking words that are uplifting, that lift people, that encourage people, where you're speaking words of love, they all come from God.
They come from God, yeah. That the Spirit is the source of that, power in your life. So, to be a prophet, of course, Jesus is the perfect prophet, right? He comes from the prophetic tradition. Jesus is a prophet in the prophetic tradition. And he's recognized one, as is John the Baptist. And Jesus is largely crucified because of his prophetic words and deeds on behalf of those who are outcast. So once he starts to teach neighbor love, practice neighbor love, point out what's going wrong in this neighborhood, he's in trouble.
Would you limit your understanding or description or definition of a prophet to the social realm? And the reason I ask is my sense of a prophet is anybody who calls us to examine the things that are preventing us from being any of these other.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, they tell the truth. Right. Prophecy is a form of being a witness too, right?
If I'm not
exactly.
the worshiper that I'm supposed to be, and somebody helps me understand.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Because prophets speak within their own community about the faithfulness and the life that's being lived in the community. Prophets don't tell the oppressor what's wrong. If you think about the Old Testament, they don't go over to, the Babylonians and say, hey, you shouldn't really be exiling us. They say to the Israelite community, you're not living this covenant faithfully. So prophets call within the community toward deeper faithfulness. So I think that's right. That's right. What? A prophet in his own land. Okay, and the final one, of course, is steward. I'm sorry. I'm rushing here because I thought you wanted to get up and move around a little bit. Okay. So the final one is to be a steward. So, of course, this comes in two places in the Old Testament. Of course, it comes from the doctrine of creation, that God has given us everything on earth, all these beautiful things. Psalm 8 says, when I look to the work of your fingers, the moon and the skies that you established there, what are human persons that you care for them, mere mortals, right, that you care for them, that you've given us dominion over the work of your hands, placed all things under our feet, all sheep and oxen, all birds of the sky, all fish of the sea, and all things that creep along the paths of the sea. I love that line. So how majestic is your name, O God, above all the earth. So this idea that God has given us stewardship over his whole creation. So that's one meaning of stewardship. The other one comes from the idea of the household manager. That stewards were people that looked over the goods of the community, that made sure that there was food on your table and a comfortable, is your seat comfortable? A comfortable seat to sit in, and they care for this building. And honestly, one of the things about being at St. John's is the Abbey has such a deep commitment to the stewardship of this place. I have never worked in a place that is so cared for. Every inch of it, honestly. It's so beautiful and it's so cared for. And of course, the rule of Benedict says that treat all the utensils of the table, everything in the monastery, as if it's the sacred vessels of the table. So this chair and this bed, I always say, you'll never see at St. John's a bed tossed out a window, by the Johnnies. They know who made that bed. They know that a monk made the bed that they sleep in. So this deep connection to the material reality of our life. So the household manager. Jesus picks that up in the New Testament. He has a couple parables about household managers. They're pretty funny because they're dishonest, right? They steal the stuff from. But he also says that a good disciple should be as wise and prudent as a steward. And Paul picks up the idea, he expands the notion of stewards and says that we are all stewards of the mysteries of our faith. Isn't that a beautiful line? So we have been given this tradition. We have been given, the scriptures, this whole rich tradition of our faith and practice, and we are stewards of that. We are stewards of the mysteries of our faith. So, discipleship. It's not 7 different things. I think these are just particular aspects of discipleship that I picked up in my study of the New Testament. You might see some other ones. It's not an achievement. It's not something you can just work harder at, but it is our identity. I'm arguing that it is our fundamental core identity as Christians from baptism. And I also think it's a fundamental ecclesial identity. Avery Dulles, remember he wrote that famous book a couple years ago, Models of the Church? Any of you who studied theology back in the 70s, and he had the 5 models. Well, he revised the book, I don't know, in the 80s or 90s. And he said, these models are all really fine and everybody knows what they are. But really, fundamentally, he said I was wrong. The fundamental model of the church is discipleship, that the church is a community of disciples. So, okay, let's take a break, and then we'll come back for our second question. Let's see, 10 minutes? 10 minutes. All right. So, so I was doing this work on thinking about the call to discipleship, the call to ministry. What is ministry? How do I want to frame what's ministry? To answer that question, I had to deal with the idea of vocation. Now, I'm not going to lie to you. I just thought, I can't stand this term. I grew up with very narrow Catholic understanding of vocation, didn't like it very much, and really struggle with it. If you Google vocation, you come up with vocation to the priesthood. And there's nothing wrong with vocation to the priesthood if you have one, but not everybody has that vocation. So I was really struggling with, is there any way that I could reframe this or broaden this and make it more interesting and exciting to people? Well, I went to the library, I read every book on vocation, and I'll tell you what, I was totally and completely wrong. It's just about the most exciting theological idea I ever bumped into, and nobody told me. Wow, I didn't even know it. In fact, I think my whole dissertation's about vocation, and I never even framed it in that category. Okay, so my question for you is, do all Christians have a calling or a vocation, or only do some? That is the traditional Catholic teaching, of course, that only some have a vocation. And the second question is, are all Christians called to ministry, or only some? Okay, so take a couple minutes and discuss that, and then we'll come back together and I'll tell you my answer. Ready to come back together? I hate to cut you off. Okay, let's hear from some. What do you think? Do all Christians have a calling? Yes or no? Oh, yes, crowd. Okay, definitely. Okay. Do all Christians have a call to ministry? Yes. Or only some?
Some recognize it, some don't.
Fascinating. Ed?
You have to define your terms.
Okay. All right. What do you want to define?
Ministry, if we're talking about ministry, with official ministry within the church, as the hierarchy defines it, then not everybody is called to all that ministry. If we're talking about ministry as discipleship that you just went through, yes, everybody is called to it.
Okay. Okay.
You want that?
Yes, you do.
You still can't have your cow back.
I want my cow back.
But you can keep the wife.
Don't bear false witness about that.
Okay, here's how I'm going to answer it. Yes, no. Sorry. It's the second time I'm going to disagree with you. Yeah. Okay, let's answer the first one. Okay, so like I said, I went to the library, read all these books, and lo and behold, who did I discover? The great patron saint of vocation is Martin Luther. How many Lutherans in the crowd? Always a Lutheran. If you got Martin Luther in your blood, okay, well, this is one of the greatest guys in the history of the Christian faith, honestly. Okay, Luther is just wonderful. So most of you associate Luther's great theological breakthrough with the doctrine of justification, that we're all justified by faith through grace, which was one of his great insights, right? You don't have to do anything to earn God's love and grace, was Luther's great insight. But he had another central doctrine of the Christian life, and that was vocation. Luther believed that we are all called, that we all have a general vocation and a particular vocation. And I just fell in love with this idea. So here's what Luther thought. Luther said, by baptism, we are all baptized into the same call or calling or vocation. I'm using capital C here. And I'm using discipleship as that primary basic call that we all share. We all share the same vocation together. And it doesn't matter if you become a priest, a sister, married, single, what age you are, we all share the same calling. We don't lose that fundamental call when we become something else, right? That's our primary identity. Luther believed, but here was Luther's big change. Luther believed that all Christians receive particular callings, a particular vocation from God. That he believed you are called in the home, the neighborhood, in your church, and in the community, in your work. Luther's the one who really linked call and work, the profession that you have, the work that you do in the world. Because Luther argued that God calls within the particularities of your life, in the context of your life, wherever you are, to love the neighbor, to practice neighbor love in that place. So Luther had a very strong notion of God calling you in the place that you are. Another idea I really like. Now, the problem, so Luther thought, and he was a medieval Christian, he thought if you were born into a baker's family and you would become a baker. And God called you in being a baker to live out, you're a farmer, you're a wife and mother, you're a wife and mother, you're a wife and mother, you're a wife. Okay, so he had a very, right, he lived in a pretty static social environment. And one of the downsides of Luther's teaching on vocation is that it became pretty static. And it tended to support the status quo. It did not have a strong prophetic edge. The idea that you are called to something only came later, more with Calvin and the Puritans. Luther just thought you were born in this place and you served in this place. But I have a huge research project on vocation now. I've fallen in love so much with the idea. And I've been doing some work on it. And I'm trying to retrieve Luther's idea of being called in a situation by trying to say that sometimes we're in places in our lives, particularly illness, suffering, waiting, in between jobs sometimes, in a bad job that you don't feel called to. What else? I have a couple of them. Are you a caregiver for anyone? You're in a situation in which you have no choice. One of the things about vocation is that we make such an emphasis that it's all about choice, that it's what I choose that I'm going to do with my life. So that when I'm a young adult, if I just have it all figured out, what my major is, what I'm, what job I'm going to get, who I'm going to get married, then this whole issue of vocation is settled. And that's just about the worst theology of vocation that is out there. Too long in our tradition, vocation has been too static, too linear, it's just one big decision in your life, it's all, you're done. Baloney. Vocation is your whole life long. God's call your whole life long. When Luther coupled vocation and calling with work, then it also tended to become a problem too, because when you retire from work, which is also a really bad construct, right? We got to get rid of that idea.
You graduate.
Your vocation doesn't end. God's still calling you. My mother-in-law, who drives me nuts, she's 97. God is calling her. God has callings for her, particular callings for her. So I like this shared broad notion of God's call and then the particularities. You know, I teach here at St. John's. I don't teach at St. Thomas, you know. I married this husband, not the other one. I had a choice. You know, I could have chosen the other one. You know, I teach these students. You know, I live in Minnesota, not in Florida. You know, I grew up in Iowa. I have these sisters. You know, so there's a particularity about my life and a uniqueness, just like there is in your life, in your life, in your life. And God calls you in that particularity, so that our callings are really different and varied and unique as each of us are. Okay, so that I got really excited about this general idea about vocation. But a lot of theology of vocation hinges on who and what you think God is. And if you think that God is a grand designer of the universe, like people did in the 17th century, and you tie vocation very strongly to the doctrine of providence, then you think maybe that God has planned out every detail in your life, and that you don't know it. God does, and it's your job to figure it out. That was a very strong, both Catholic and Protestant, understanding of vocation. Like if you could just do a MapQuest search, you know, you'd figure out what God wanted you to do. Well, today theologians have a much they honor that understanding of vocation because some people do experience God's call that way, but people also experience God's call in a whole variety of ways. So if we had time to talk about our call stories, we would see that. But today people talk about God's call as more relational, evolving, and dynamic. Relational, evolving, and dynamic. That vocation is not a noun. It's not something I get from God. It's my relationship with God. Over time, it's more relational. It's something God and I create together, that we make, that we craft. So it's not some little secret that God has that you don't know about. So it's more relational. It's more evolving. Things change in my life. When I made a decision about what to do when I was 22, things are different now, right? God keeps calling me. My call changes, right? Or how to live out that call can change at times. So it's evolving and it's dynamic. There's an interplay. I know from an early age that God was calling me to be a teacher. When I had to choose between, well, it wasn't St. Thomas and St. John's, but it was another place in St. John's, I heard God say, I don't really care which one you choose. They're both good. You'll do good work in either institution. Just go and be a great teacher. So I didn't feel like God had just... But that was my experience, you know? So evolving, dynamic, relational. Lifelong, my whole life long. Okay, but if I was going to answer, so my argument goes like this. This is discipleship. This is ministry. Ministry is a particular vocation. I had to figure out a way to argue for that, without falling back on the idea that ministry, leadership in the Christian community is higher, better, holier than every other kind of calling. We just fall back into that pattern. So I had to find a way to get there. Oh yeah, this is another, I'm not going to do this, sorry. Okay, so the way that I got there was through Paul's idea of charisms.
You can have more than one vocation.
Absolutely. That's why the callings is plural. You have many callings. I'm a wife, a daughter, a teacher, a gardener, a retreat leader, right. Many callings. They're dynamic, they change, they evolve. So the idea of, sorry, I don't have a slide on this. Paul's notion of charisms is how I got to the diversity of callings that we all have in our life. So just real quickly, a summary of Paul's notion of charisms, which he talks about in 3 places in his letters. Paul also distinguishes between two kinds of gifts. Gifts that we all receive, like faith, hope, and charity. But then he also defines particular gifts that are given in the community, which he calls charisms. And the Greek word here, charism, has many different roots. One is joy, one is grace. It's kind of a graciousness, God's gracious presence. But the idea is that it's a gift. It's not something you earn. It's not something you do. It is something you do, but it's something that God has given you. He lists a variety of gifts in these three places, though I don't think they're exhaustive lists. So he's not listing every gift that's in the Christian community. But he does say a few things about these gifts. And the primary one is they're not given for you. Your gifts are not given for your self-achievement, for your self-betterment, or your self-advancement. Gifts are given for the common good. Gifts are given to build up the body of Christ. So all the gifts that we could name in this room and all of our lives are meant to be given for building up the body. So again, there's this deep connection between my individual gifts and the well-being of this community all the communities that I serve, home, neighborhood, family. So he also emphasizes that gifts are diverse. Not everyone in the community gets all the gifts, but nobody gets just one gift, okay? That there's a diversity of gifts. And that the diversity of gifts is the foundation for the unity of that body, right? We're not the true body unless there's a diversity of gifts. He also says, he says that charisms are gifts for service. Charisms are gifts for service. They're capacities, there's qualities to do something, to act, right? You do something. It's not just an idea, it's not just a private internal quality. And all the gifts that he lists are not just gifts for ministerial or church leadership. He makes a really important pneumatological claim, a claim about the Holy Spirit. That wherever this body of Christ is constituted, the Spirit ensures that all gifts are given for the goodness of that body. Think about this. The gifts are present. We can refuse to acknowledge them in ourselves or in each other. We can block the manifestation of gifts in a community. Don't ever sit around a table and say, well, we don't have those gifts. The Spirit ensures that we have the gifts. But gifts are nascent. Gifts are nascent. Gifts are a little bit like, at Christmas time when you got this big present, like from your parents, and then you opened it, but you realized you couldn't play with it immediately. It was going to take like 4 or 5 hours for them to construct it. That's kind of how charisms are. They don't come fully ready-made. They're not automatic. It's not like a sign of a gift is that you can just do it perfectly. Right? Okay, maybe Mozart could, but let's just take him off the table, and then there's the rest of us, right? So we see intimations toward these gifts in each other, and particularly in young people, we want to nurture these gifts. So I see gifts in my classroom, just tons of gifts from the people. They're trying to discern whether those gifts are the gifts for ministry or for something else. So, for example, I had this student a couple years ago. She was a youth minister up the road here. And by about the, 6th week of class, she came to me in tears saying, I got to be honest, I really don't think I have a call to ministry, and I'm really, really sorry. And I said, no. The point of this class is to discern whether you have the gifts for these practices. So I wanted to link the gifts, the practices of ministry, to particular gifts, to particular vocation. I said, there's nothing to be sorry about. No, don't apologize. Just because I'm excited about ministry, just because you don't have a vocation to ministry does not mean you don't have a vocation. God is calling you to something. So let's figure that out. And that's totally exciting. Ministry is not a better vocation than that. It's just another vocation. But I said, what do you love? What are you passionate about? What are your gifts are? She said, I love teens. I love high school students. I said to her, a lot of people love teens. High school football coach loves teens. The English teacher, the guidance counselor. There's a lot of different ways to serve teens, right? There's a lot of different, so let's define, you need to understand this is what youth ministry is in the church. It's not being a guidance counselor. It's not being a football coach. It's not being these other things. So that's discernment of gifts to try to figure out, what has God given me to do in the world in terms of service. Okay, some gifts, Paul says, are temporary. Some are lifelong. So I take from Paul that gifts can change over time. Have you had this experience? God has given you a gift, and you use it, and then at some point you kind of realize, I think that's over. I think something's ended. I'm not doing that anymore. I feel called to something else. Sometimes we feel called from something without a clear sense of to, what the to is. But we know something's ended. Well, pneumatologically, I'd say maybe the Spirit, maybe that gift is laid to rest, but the Spirit is giving you new gifts or different gifts. So, for example, I have a friend, she was a social worker for years. About midlife, she loved horses, and she got trained in Pirellis, and now she does social work with horses. No, with their owners. Now she's a world-class Pirellis trainer. Something ended for her. It wasn't about burnout either. It wasn't just about being burned out from being a social worker, which you can imagine. She felt something springing up in her. I have a neighbor next door who's a family physician in town, and in his late 50s, he started to feel the call to do palliative care, and now he's a hospice doctor. He didn't have that call when he was 22 and went to medical school. Something's changed within his call as a doctor, and something new emerged, and honest to God, does he have the gifts for it. It's unbelievable. So I'm thinking you can think of 100 examples, right? All right, Mike's going to share an example.
I have a friend, a couple. He is quadriplegic.
Okay.
And,
Speak up.
He totally relies on others for care. And his wife feels it's her calling.
Aha. To care.
And she is totally comfortable with it.
Okay, so that's a good example.
Never heard her complain.
She
Doesn't
feels
walk
called
around
to
with
this
long
care.
face.
Right.
That's calling.
The challenge for the quadriplegic, of course, is to discover God's call in this new place. Nobody chooses to be a quadriplegic, right? So, but wow, yeah. Okay, so see how exciting vocation is? Yeah, I never knew. Someone should have told me when I was younger. Okay, so I wanted to link this theology of vocation and callings up with ministry. And, okay. So I wanted to argue that there are key practices to ministry. There are certain things that ministers do that are distinctive. And we look for those practices. We look for the gifts for those practices. And don't kick me out. Here's my argument. I wish we would help young people or middle-aged people discern whether they have the gifts for the practices before we ask them whether they want to be a priest or a deacon I think that's not the first question. The first question is whether you have the gifts for the practices. So, see, I'm trying to link gifts, practices, what's distinctive about ministry. So, I guess I can do this from here. All right. So here's my argument. I'm going to disagree with your question. I'm going to say that ministry is a distinct calling among many callings in the Christian community. I don't think that all disciples are are ministers or practice ministry. Okay, but I'll tell you what, both answers are correct. I started out this morning by saying that in the New Testament, the term ministry means service in the Gospels. So in the earliest strata of the New Testament, the earliest documents that were written, ministry with a small m just meant service, the service that we do for one another. So in essence, discipleship is a kind of ministry. Richard McCormick, the Notre Dame theologian, back in the 80s was one of the first people to write a book called What is Ministry? And in it, he defines it with a capital M, formal leadership in the Christian community, most commonly associated with ordination, and small m, the kind of service we all do. And this became a very popular way. So all Christians have a ministry, small m, and then some Christians have big M ministry. So the World Council of Churches picked up the same idea in their 1983 document, Baptism, Eucharist, and Ministry, which was an ecumenical look at these three sacraments. They said the same thing, basically. So it's a very common answer for people to say, yeah, I think everybody has a ministry. Okay, now we're 20 or 30 years later, and the theologian like me comes along and says, I'm not sure that's so helpful. By the end of the New Testament period, ministry is a term designated for leaders in the community. So there's biblical evidence for both. By the end, so the later Pauline corpus, or the later writings, letters, use ministry in a more restricted way. It means those designated by the community to lead them as the community. So I'm retrieving that over the other one. Mostly because ministry also is full-time paid work and constitutes a profession in our society. So I'm trying to help students discern their way into that very particular way of doing ministry, okay? Are you mumbling, or are you just, okay. You're just mumbling. Okay, so here's my argument. Ministry is a distinct vocation among many vocations. It does not replace or supplant discipleship. All ministers are disciples. When you're called into ministry, or you're called to be a lawyer, or a doctor, or a first grade teacher, or a plumber, or a stay-at-home dad, it doesn't replace discipleship. It doesn't replace it. Ministers are not some holy or better disciple in the community. That's a bad distortion that we've lived with. They're not better disciples, okay? There's no vocation that exceeds any other vocation in the community. That's Luther's idea. What's distinctive about vocations in the community are the gifts. And as Paul says, no gift is higher or better. All gifts are needed.
I understand why you're limiting it to Christianity, but I don't see that it has to be so. I think Beethoven was a minister. I think Shakespeare was a minister. I think Hemingway was a minister.
They're all Christians.
I think Buddhists are ministers.
I see, yes. No, Buddhists, I see what you're saying. In this broad human understanding of they give their life in service to other people, absolutely. In the more restricted sense, actually the term ministry is primarily Christian. Jews do not call their leaders ministers. Buddhists do not call their leaders ministers. It is a term that comes from our... Yeah, exactly. So you like the broad... Yeah. So I'm going to give a definition of the leadership form of ministry in the Christian community. Okay? So I'm going to distinguish it that way. Yeah, Ken?
So when you train, for example, a youth minister at the School of Theology, you're training them to lead disciples, not just to be with them, to discern their own vocation, etc., but you're in addition to that, you're trying to help them to do other ministries. You're training leaders of ministry.
Yes. Lecture's over. Yeah. Ministry exists in the church to serve discipleship. Ministry exists to lead disciples. Ministers don't have to make disciples. Christ has done that in baptism. God makes disciples. The primary work of ministry is to nurture the life of discipleship. And believe me, I had the biggest conversion when I realized that the vocation to ministry constitutes the vocation of calling forth all vocations in the community. All vocations in the community. All these particular callings that we have in our life. That's what's distinctive about ministry. And that's what's really exciting about it. My students think that the primary job of the youth minister, the faith formation director, or the liturgist is to get people more involved at church. Now, that's not a bad thing, to get people more involved at church. But their vocations, right, all those particular callings reach way beyond that in all areas of their life. And if somebody never volunteers at church to be a Eucharistic minister on the youth ministry team, does that mean that they not live out their discipleship? No way. This woman who's heard the call to, care for her husband, wow. Every minister should help her live out that calling as deeply and richly as she can. So, yeah, that's my answer. So ministry is a unique and a particular vocation, but it's not the only one. So baptism, back to the baptism idea, baptism grounds all of us in discipleship. Out of discipleship, the Spirit gifts us with particular gifts, and each of us has to discern what those gifts are. I think that the charisms for ministry are deeply related to 6 practices. And these 6 practices arise out of the features of discipleship. So here's my connection between this life of discipleship and these 6 practices. These 6 practices, as Thomas O'Mara said, theologian at Notre Dame, are enduring. They always exist wherever the Christian community is, and they've existed since Christ. Teaching, leading worship, presiding at worship, preaching, pastoral care, social justice ministry, and administration. So teaching obviously arises out of being a follower. Being a follower. Leading worship obviously arises out of worship, right? Being a worshiper, right? Preaching arises out of being a witness. Being a witness. Pastoral care arises out of neighbor love, forgiveness. Yeah, 4 parts. I just taught pastoral care, so forgive me. 4 parts of pastoral care: healing, sustaining, guiding, forgiving, reconciliations. Big ministry, pastoral care. Social ministry and administration arises out of stewardship. Social ministry arises out of being called a prophet. So these practices exist within the Christian community because of the nature of discipleship, not the other way around. Do you see? As disciples, all of us need ministers in our community to teach, to offer pastoral care, to preside at liturgy. So I think that there are particular gifts for these practices. So ministers are teachers who help disciples learn the path of discipleship. Ministers preside over the community's prayer in order that the community might worship as one body. So leading worship and prayer arises out of being a worshiper. To practice being a witness, we said, means telling others about what God has done. The ministry of preaching is giving a witness on behalf of the community. You see the links? Offering pastoral care to those who are sick, to the dying, is to bring care on behalf of the community. Same thing about social outreach. So my students often come to the School of Theology. These young people, you just can't believe it. They just totally want to change the world, right? So they want to, work at the food shelf and protest down at the Capitol, and what else do they want to do? They want to save the environment. That's a big one. That's huge. Oh, man, they just want to work at all this social justice stuff. So I say to them, well, that's what a disciple does. Disciples are supposed to work to save the environment, right? Work at the food pantry, work at the... What's the difference? What's the difference between the two? Do you feel God has given you the gifts to lead disciples in caring for the earth? You might think it's a small distinction, but it's important. Because the ministry of any social ministry involves all of these aspects. A lot of administration, for one thing. It's about leading disciples to carry out their discipleship. Got it? Do you see the distinction? All right, pastoral care. We're all called to go and visit our neighbor when they're sick in the hospital. What's the difference when the minister goes? Whether it's Peggy, who's a chaplain in the St. Mary's now? In the Duluth Hospital, or an ordained priest. What's the difference if they go or if you go? On
behalf of the community.
Exactly. Ministers they are called by the community to represent the community. There's a very strong representative notion here, I think, which is my next slide. Oh, sorry, that was just another way of looking at it. I'm going to come back to that. On behalf of a Christian, I skipped ahead. On behalf of a Christian community. So our theology of priesthood out of the Middle Ages had a very strong notion of in persona Christe, in the person of Christ. And today theologians use the idea of in persona ecclesiae, in the person of the community. That you don't just represent Christ, you represent all of us, the ordained person. And I would say here the deacon or the lay ecclesial ministry. We designate people as our representative. So when that minister goes to the hospital to visit someone or leads the social justice ministry to organize the food pantry, right? They are representing all of us in that capacities. And disciples, by and large, don't do that. But here's the problem with ministry. Here is the big problem. Ministers tend to absorb all the practices of ministry into themselves. Think about this. Aha. So let's say you go to church and you just have a fantastic preacher and he can just preach and you just love it. And you said, well, that's great. Father's a great preacher and I just listen. No, preaching does not replace your call to give a witness. Do you see? Really good preaching should call you to give a witness. Now, a really good preacher does not confuse preaching with giving a witness. If a preacher stands up there and just talks about themselves, they've missed the point of preaching. There's a distinction. A good preacher can offer a witness from their own life, but they have got to give a witness on behalf of our lives. Do you see? They have to give a witness about what God is doing in our lives, in many lives, not just their own life. There's a distinction there. It's on behalf of the community. That's the gift you're looking for when you call somebody up into ministry. Do you see? Okay? A teacher, you don't just teach your own ideas or your own thoughts. You are looking for somebody with the gift to teach the tradition, right? Or caring for the sick or caring for the dying. So it's on behalf of. Which ones did I skip there? Yeah, ministry is always a public act. You should know when people are doing it. It's discernible in word, it's an action, it's speech, it's symbolic. Discipleship is lived out all over the place, all the time, every day. Sometimes it's very discernible, sometimes it's very ordinary and not so obvious. So when a clerk is very kind to you in the checkout line, at the grocery store, they're living out their discipleship through that vocation, right? And you may not even know their intention or why they're doing it. I would argue ministry better be pretty, now this is my argument to students, better be pretty explicit. People better know when you come to visit them, I come in the name of St. Joe Parish and in the name of Christ to be with you. See? It's very explicit. I mean, when we worship on Sunday, it's pretty explicit, right? When I'm teaching you about the gospel, I'm teaching about this text, in this tradition, for these purposes. I just think ministry, it's changed so much, it has to be more intentional and more explicit about what it's doing and why, right? Because most people don't know what it is or why it exists or what it's for. So I put a strong emphasis on public act. Did I have another one? No. Okay, all right, sorry, this is kind of a long one. So I think that ministry is a gift received through faith and baptism, charism, vocation, so we did that. That's acknowledged in a community through rituals of commissioning, installation, and ordination. So here's our problem. By and large, generally, I would say, historically, when a Christian community, any Christian community I'm talking about, not just Roman Catholicism, has recognized people, I think that you would be a great leader of our community. We ordain them. We lay hands on them and say, we recognize that God has gifted you with these gifts, and we want you to lead us. This is how it normally happens. We call that ordination. It goes back to the New Testament. Okay, now we have, here's the challenge in the last 20 years. We have all these people coming forth for ministry, we don't ordain them. So there has to be some public sign and symbol, some recognition by the community that this person is our minister. So we developed other rituals. Do you guys have commissionings and installations? Okay, I think this is basically a good development, particularly for lay people. I use the term. For those people, yeah, who have the gifts for ministry, and they're not ordained. So we install them, or we commission them. So what's happened in ministry is it doesn't matter whether it's full-time, part-time, pay. It does matter if it's paid or unpaid. We should pay our ministers, particularly our full-time ministers. We should pay them well. I'm serious. I really am. Catholics have very little concept of what it means to pay for our ministers. But we better get used to it, or we're going to you want to know what my biggest complaint is? Incompetence. There's too much incompetence in ministry. Either because of a poor theology of gifts, we just think, well, God's given them the gifts so that they just do it perfectly. Baloney. Or we ordain them and we think, well, they'll get it as they go on after ordination. Mm-mm. We ordain people with the gifts and the potential to grow into more mature practice. Competence in practice is really important. You don't just learn how to preach well or teach well or care for the sick and dying. You don't even learn that in taking one class in the School of Theology. Sorry, is the dean here? You learn a little bit, but you only learn by practicing over time, and that is true in every profession. Do you know that the majority of people in most professions, and this is true in ministry, leave within the first 5 years because they don't feel competent to do what they actually have to do in the work? That's really scary when we're investing tons of money in their education. You have to grow in competence over time in what you do. These rituals are acknowledging our commitment to that person's growth and integrity in their practice. So when we commission people in faith formation, not just the director of faith formation, but I mean all those, people who teach first grade and confirmation, youth ministry and liturgy, if you're a reader or a Eucharistic minister. It's what Rick Gallardi calls ecclesial repositioning. It's when a person in the community steps forward and stands in a different place within that community. Not over or above other people, but within the body in a distinctive way. So, and that's always what ordination has been. But we can acknowledge that we have such a diversity of roles in ministry now that there's other ways of acknowledging that. So you're probably wondering, well, what do I think about ordination? There's got to be some distinction between ordination and all these other kinds of ministries, right? Yeah, there is, I think. So, I mean, there's lots of things to say, but you're probably hungry. Are we serving lunch? Okay. Just going back to my New Testament argument, I would argue that what's distinctive about ordination to the priesthood, not the diaconate, to priesthood, or for Protestants to the pastorate, is the idea of presiding over the entire community. So this is the New Testament idea, the overseer, the one who presides over the whole. So that I think ordination today constitutes presiding over disciples and ministers. In the Christian tradition, neither the diaconate nor lay people who are called into ministry have ever presided over the whole. Think about that. It's a good distinction. It's a good distinction. So when we are ordaining men to the priesthood, by golly, we better be looking for the capacity to oversee the whole community. All right, now this leads me back to a point that I mentioned at the beginning. Do all ministers have all these gifts? Well, maybe Jesus did, but... So when you're looking to call someone, to say to someone, I think you've got some gifts for ministry, and they shake in their boots and say, oh, no, please, not me, not me. But I think you should really, right? This is what we do, right? I think you should really think about it. I think you would be great working with children. I think you'd be great working with our teens or something like that, right? Do they have all these gifts? The answer is no, they do not. I don't know one student that's ever come through here, okay, maybe you, Peg, that has all these gifts. They usually have some constellation of them. And like I said, when they enter the door through liturgy or faith formation or through social justice, and they're just totally passionate about that, it's usually because that's where God's given them their gifts. Okay, but here's the thing about ministry. While no minister receives all the gifts, all ministers, particularly the ordained, who preside over the whole community, have to make sure that the gifts for the practices are all present within the community. Okay, so that should relieve the ordained. But, so I said, the call to ordination of the priesthood is the call to preside over the whole community, disciples and ministers. Everyone on a ministry team, let's say in a parish, they're not going to have all the gifts. So somebody in faith formation might be really great at that, but they're not so good at leading worship, right? They got to know when to bring those gifts into that ministry. I was in a parish in Chicago many years ago, and the priest was just a fantastic preacher. Man, he could preach. I mean, when you see that gift, it's a gift, isn't it? It's just great. It's just great. I also don't think we should ordain people who can't preach, but okay, that's my little hobby horse. That's my little hobby horse.
Can I hear a hallelujah?
Well, anyway, that's a long story. That's a long history. What was I saying? Oh yeah, Father Jenks. Okay, but he did not like pastoral care work, and he admitted it. He was nervous going to visit people in the hospital. He particularly did not want to be around people who were suffering and dying. He just did not feel comfortable. But he built one of the most fantastic ministry of care ministries in that parish, where he got anybody with a gift for visiting the sick or the dying to be part of that team and part of that group. That was his proper role. He doesn't have to do it all. He has to ensure that it all happens. Do you see? Anyway, that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. Okay, so, okay, your lunch is here, so I better wrap it up, huh? Okay, well, we're not going to do that one. So I've argued that ministry is the calling to nurture disciples in living out their callings for the sake of building up the body of Christ. Uh-oh, what happened to my last? Okay, let's go back as we finish to our image. Take the image out that we began our prayer with. Take a look at it. What's one thing you're going to take away from today that you see in this picture or that you've heard from the reading or that we talked about this morning? What's one thing as you gaze into the call to discipleship?
There's a lot of disciples in this.
There's a lot of disciples in that picture, aren't there? All of them. Yeah, they're all disciples. What else do you see or hear? Mm-hmm.
I don't know if this comes from the picture, but I just realized in our last speaking that we need to do a lot more commissioning.
Absolutely.
We need to do more commissioning of our ministries. I have a choir I need to commission.
You should commission them. They're called into a particular role in that community. But here's the other thing I think. We should also do more blessings of everyone's vocations in the community. I know parishes who bless the nurses during National Nursing Week, or who call forth on Labor Day, ask people to bring the tools of their work to church to be blessed by the community. We need a broader notion. Not just ministers should be blessed in their ministry. All great-grandparents should be called forward and blessed in their calling to be great-grandparents, right? So we need a more diverse... The St. Joe Parish, see, now you got me off on vocation, down the road here in St. Joe, in their funeral materials for a funeral, you work at St. Joe now, this is so fantastic. So they give if you have someone die, they give you this packet to help you plan the liturgy. So you have some songs to choose from, some readings to choose from, according to the liturgy rite. Then they have all these prayers of the faithful that they've compiled over the years for all these different professions and area of work. So it might be, we give thanks for Joe, who was a wonderful accountant. He loved numbers and he helped people with their taxes. Something, that was his work. He gave a big part of his life to that. And that church is about the only church I've ever heard of that incorporates that work into, isn't that wonderful? I love that. So we could do a lot more around blessing and installing and giving thanks for all that particularity. Okay, what's something else that you see or hear that you're going to take away from today? Yeah.
It's all the work of the Holy Spirit.
Oh, you said that at the beginning. I heard you say that. First thing you said to me. I said to you, how are you doing? And he said, I'm just close to perfect. And I said, why? It's all the work of the Holy Spirit, he said. I agree. It is all the work of the Holy Spirit. Anybody else? One more. Yes?
That Christ is there in the midst, right in the middle.
Christ is the center. Christ is the center of your discipleship, all your callings. Yep. Yep. Okay, that's a good place to close. Well, thank you very much for coming today. Grace is going to have the final word.